morning, all. Good morning. All right. Thanks for being here, Mark.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to take the conversation back to the beginning. And a gentleman on this morning's panel asked the question, what's the cost of not educating a child? And here's my answer, 9 years. So 9 years of life expectancy, that's the difference between someone who drops out of high school and someone who gets a college degree. And at RWJF, we believe that health and education are inextricably linked. And we know that a healthier child is, the easier it is for them to go to school, to make the most of their education. The more education a student gets, the healthier they will be in the long run. We also know that that connection starts at day one. Babies are born learning. So Mark, as a fierce advocate of Save the Children Action Network, as someone who is keeping children and families right at the center, what do you make of the needs of children and families, and what should we be thinking about if we want to ensure that all children get a healthy start and make the most of their education?
Well, thank you, Jennifer, and thank you to the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and for everyone coming here today. I mean, I think this issue is the biggest social justice issue in the country right now. And I think it's a huge economic issue as well. You talk about 9 years less life expectancy when a kid is 4 years of age and living in poverty in this country. That child is 18 months behind by the age of 4, behind my kid or your kid or I would venture to say everybody's children, nephews and nieces in this country. So essentially, you know, there are so many different layers to what you asked about. There's the parent-school relationship. There's the social emotional piece of it. There's investments that we have not made as a country into those first 5 years of life. When Head Start is only serving, you know, roughly 40 to 50% of the kids that are eligible, early Head Start's only serving 5% of the kids that are eligible or less, depends on the numbers you're looking at nowadays. I think the question is, how are we going to get motivated? And that's what Save the Children Action Network was started 3.5 years ago, because if you look around in this room and across the country, you know, there's a reason the health care bill that came out was changed, wasn't enacted. AARP played a big role in it. You see the NRA out there having a huge influence on gun control legislation. You see AIPAC having a huge influence on what the American-Israeli relationship is. And I'm not jealous of all those organizations, but I ask, you know, what is that organization that's doing that for children? So when you talk about what's needed, you know, there's the content that's crucially important, the social emotional work that I know you've done so much work on, and others in this room. But how are we going to mobilize as a political voice and demand that our elected leaders on both the federal, the state, local level really do invest in our kids? And if they don't, how are we going to get them out of office? So, you know, I did a lot of work at Save the Children where you'd have this concept of the bobblehead, where every elected official that I dealt with told me, yeah, kids are the most important thing, and the first 5 years of life are really important. And they'd say, yeah, you're doing God's work. And then when push comes to shove, they don't invest. So what do we need in this country? We need an NRA for kids. We need to have people mobilized out there. I mean, everybody in my office tells me I've got to stop that analogy. But, I mean, think about it. I mean, what is, you know, when President Trump put forth a piece of legislation on health care, AARP was on the airwaves, spending millions of dollars and getting people fired up in the communities when the congressmen and senators went back to their district. Are we doing that for kids?
So that's a perfect point. And we can spend a lot of time focusing on the divergence in our perspectives. It's pretty easy to do, but when it comes down to it, we all want the same things for our children. We want safe and nurturing environments where kids can learn. We want to make sure that their kids' educational opportunities allow them to navigate a highly complex social world, make the most of their life opportunities, have a fulfilling job, etc. So if we think about sort of the common ground, what are the different types of policies that you see that cross the ideological lines where people should be rallying around our children.
And you see this, Jennifer, across the country. I mean, Save the Children works in 18 states around the country. I've been to all of those and a number of other ones. And you see a lot of support from the Alabama Chamber of Commerce to Governor Inslee in Washington State, to the newly elected governor up in New Hampshire, Chris Sununu, who is not a flaming liberal, is putting more money into all-day kindergarten in that state. So you see there are policies that resonate. The financing question is a big question. How are we going to pay for that? Because there's not some huge tranche of dough here in Washington or in state capitals, as far as I can figure out, that's going to go to early education. So how do we look at creative ways to finance it? And you see, ideas like tax increase in Seattle, to looking at social impact bonds in South Carolina under Governor Haley. So there's all different ideas across the country. But what we need to do is to figure out how to speak to each other and to move the ball forward. And I think there is strong bipartisan support. Congressman Cole from Oklahoma, Republican, has been a champion on investments on early ed in the House of Representatives. Senator Blunt from Missouri. And you see this across states as well. There is support, there is interest in this. I mean, look, there are factions on the right side that are very conservative that don't want any more early childhood education investments. And then there are, on the left side, not enough. So we got to kind of figure out how to move the ball forward and look at language that resonates and look at policies that resonates across the board. And part of what Save the Children Action Network did over the last 3.5 years was work with Republicans on Capitol Hill and in state offices, as well as Democrats, to come up with ideas that are palatable and to push those forward. We participated in the Republican convention and the Democratic convention. And, frankly, some people said you shouldn't go to Cleveland for any number of different reasons. And the answer is, if Mrs. Clinton had gotten elected, you still needed Republican support. And if President Trump gets elected, you need to have Democratic support. So we believed very strongly in the bipartisan nature of this, and then to push it and to hold these folks accountable, but to work across the aisle on both the Republicans and the Democratic side, but then to hold them accountable. If they don't do it, you got to say to them, kids are the most important resource. And it's not only a social justice issue, but it's an ROI, a rate of return argument. It's an economic argument. It's a science argument with the work that's coming out of places like the University of Washington iLabs or out of James Heckman in Chicago. I mean, these are great thinkers, scientists that are researching brain development, and other great economists who have won the Nobel Prize in economics that are looking at the economic argument. So there's a lot of info out there. We just got to get mobilized.
All right. So with that said, we have a changing landscape a little bit. There's not a lot of certainty about what's going on at the federal level, and a lot of the action is moving to the states. So I guess I'll ask you two questions. Give me a sense of one hopeful sign about what you're seeing in terms of investments in children. And secondly, what are the states to watch? Where should we be looking as examples that stand out as investing well in children and from the start?
Well, I think there's action on the state level. I think there's action on the federal level as well. I think when there is a new administration, there's a lot of unknowns, but there's also a lot of opportunities. And I think this is a big opportunity. President Trump talked about it during the campaign. You can say the policy wasn't what you wanted, but then the question is, you're going to get involved and try to move that with the Ways and Means Committee, the Budget Committee. Are we going to, talk to the administration? Yes, we're trying to do that on an ongoing basis. We Save the Children Action Network was involved in the gubernatorial race up in New Hampshire and ended up not supporting Governor Sununu. And he put $9 million new into all-day kindergarten. You can say that's not a lot of money, but it's $9 million in a pretty conservative state, New Hampshire, pretty libertarian state. And he invested this money. So I wrote an article in the Manchester Union Leader and congratulated him because he did the right thing. So you've got, Governor Sununu doing interesting things in New Hampshire. Is it enough? No. Is it a step in the right direction? Absolutely. Should he be doing more? We're going to keep pushing him. To Governor Inslee in Washington State, they're doing creative things on both the state level. as well as on the local level. So there's a lot, in Seattle and in King County, down Constantine, the county executive, Mayor Murray, and Seattle are doing interesting things on the early ed front. So you can go from the East Coast to the West Coast, and there's a lot of action out there, and it's red. So I'm
Yeah,
done.
thank you, Mark. It's clear. If we put our heads and our hearts together, we can figure this out and we can find the ways to move forward together. Thank you to the audience. I just want to put a little plug in. Come visit the Think Babies booth to hear more about strategies on how we can help children get a great educational experience right from the start. Thank you so much.